latest edition installment of our energy webinar series here at the Institute of the Americas. We're very pleased to have our esteemed colleague, Décio Oddone, the Director General of the National Petroleum Agency, ANP, in Brazil, taking time out of his busy schedule to join us late on a Thursday afternoon from Rio to share some insights on what is going to be a very, very busy calendar for the ANP and for the Brazilian upstream. For those of you who may not know, there have been a lot of changes and lots of things happening over the last year or so in Brazil with regards to the oil and gas sector, with regards to regulation, to changes in laws, with regards to Petrobras. Petrobras has embarked on a massive divestiture. There's a series of auctions that have been authorized. The National Energy Policy Council, or CNPE, has approved 9 bid rounds over the coming year and a half or 2 years in Brazil. As I mentioned, the coming weeks are going to be extremely busy. Just next week, a week from yesterday, on September 27th, annual or semi-annual auction. So there'll be the 14th auction on September 27th for a series of blocks. And then I think one that's drawn a lot of international interest and attention is the October 27th double auction for blocks in the famous pre-salt. And that'll be, if I'm not mistaken, the first pre-salt auction, or the second ever, and the first in several years. So there's a lot to talk about, and we're delighted to go straight to, as we say in English, the horse's mouth, to get some insights on the upcoming auctions. As I mentioned, there's been lots of changes. One of the things that's changed, even in the last few weeks, has been approval of the Repetro tax regime. That was something that folks were talking here in La Jolla in May about a potential impediment for some of the investments. That's been dealt with. So things are happening quickly. We have Décio Oddone joining us, as I mentioned. Décio is somebody who is, I'm sure, very well known to everyone online today, but let me just formally introduce him. Décio is now, since earlier this year, the Director General of Brazil's National Petroleum Agency, ANP. He joined ANP after an over 30-year career at Petrobras. He worked in various international posts, including as CEO of Petrobras Bolivia from 1999 to 2004, where he was instrumental in developing what is, I would say without question, one of the most important international projects in South America over the last 20 years, the Bolivia-Brazil natural gas pipeline. Décio later spent a good bit of time in Buenos Aires as in charge of Petrobras Energia, and he ended his stint with Petrobras at Braskem as the Petrobras representative to Braskem. And like I said, assumed this job, was appointed by President Temer and confirmed by the Congress in January to head Brazil's National Petroleum Agency, the body responsible for conducting auctions, oversighting and managing the upstream and oil and gas business in Brazil. And the final point I want to make is Décio is not only a dear old friend, but he's somebody who was at one point sort of my boss, because he was a member of the board of directors of the Institute of the Americas in his previous time while he was at Petrobras. And he's very busy, so we appreciate his time today and look forward to a formal presentation. And then just a final logistical commentary. As you know, the way we manage the question and answer session here is via the chat function. So after Décio has had the opportunity to make his formal presentation, we will, and by the way, as he presents, feel free to post questions here on the chat function, but we'll reserve the questions until the end and then have a question and answer session in using the chat function. I just wrote question there, so that's where you'll be able to pose your questions. I see several of you've already found the chat function. Thank you. And without any further ado, let me turn it over to Décio Oddone. Décio, thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you in this webinar. It's as you mentioned, I have a emotional connection with the Institute. I've been a board member for almost 10 years, so it's always a pleasure to participate in the Institute events, especially the La Jolla conference. It's really amazing. So if you are able to upload the presentation, we can start talking. Well, as you know, we are facing very exciting times in the oil industry, not only in Brazil but worldwide. All right, so we are going through exciting moments not only in Brazil but also in the worldwide oil and gas industry. So we start with the normal disclaimers. I will go through them, and I intend to talk about the scenario that we have in our oil and gas industry, the improvements we are doing here in Brazil in order to attract investments and to resume the activity, the specifics of the bidding rounds that we will have to perform from next week's onwards. Now we have a bid round calendar, goes up to 2019, and we intend to extend it to up to 2021. And then I will have some remarks on the gas and downstream business in Brazil, and then the final remarks. Starting up with the oil industry in Brazil, we are the 10th largest producer in the world, the first producer for the first time ever in Latin America. But I say that we are the largest producer in Latin America because not of our merits, but because of the lack of investments in major producing countries in the region lately. So the numbers in Brazil, the production in Brazil, they do not reflect the potential that we have. So lately we stopped after the famous pre-salt reserve discovery in 2006, 2007. We stopped the bidding rounds for discussing the new regulation, and during this period we also had, from 2007 onwards, we have Petrobras crisis, and in 2014 the reduction in oil prices worldwide. So these effects, they caused a strong decrease in exploration in Brazil. A number of exploratory wells drilled dropped dramatically. The number of oil discoveries, it went down dramatically. We had the reduction of number of drilling rigs operating in Brazil, a reduction of development wells in Brazil as well. And then as a result of that, we had in our onshore basins a very strong reduction in production. From 2012 to 2017, production went down 27%. When we look the offshore scenario, then we add the pre-salt production. We realize that production is growing because of the pre-salt production. In all other basins, Campos Basin, Santos and Espírito Santo Basin, the northeast basins in Brazil, all basins they had a decline in production, and the very quick increase in production in the pre-salt lately was responsible for the increase in production that we have in Brazil. Now production is around 3 million barrels a day, more than 3 million barrels a day, and more than 50% of the production now comes from the very prolific pre-salt reserves. It are really spectacular. We have an unparalleled potential in the pre-salt for billions of barrels of reserves and very, very high productivity. In the Campos and Santos Basin, but especially in the Santos Basin, we have average production of almost 30,000 barrels a day per well. I say per well. We consider that the pre-salt, together with the Middle East and the shale oil in the U.S., the three main production areas in the globe, in the as I call the first league of the oil exploration arena. But additionally to the pre-salt, we have prospectivity very high in Brazil. We have the whole east margin, from Pelotas Basin up to the Potiguar Basin in the northeast, going through Santos and Campos Basin, Espírito Santo, Sergipe Alagoa Basin. We have the equatorial margin on the north of Brazil and onshore basins. So we barely know our potential. Our intention now is to increase exploration in Brazil so we understand better what is our potential. We have a situation now that we have a discussion in global scenario about peak demand, not anymore about peak oil. We are in an environment that we all know that oil price is set to be low for longer. A bit of a transition for a low carbon economy. Oil will lose relevance in the decades to come. So in this scenario, we must know better our prospectivity. We have less than 5% of our acreage under contract, and we have drilled only 30,000 wells in the whole exploratory and production history of the country. So it's time for Brazil to know better our potential and to develop as soon as possible our oil and gas reserves. In 2007, when we stopped the bidding rounds to discuss the new regulation to apply for the pre-salt, we excluded 41 blocks from the 9th bidding round that ANP was going to perform, and this was a window of opportunity that we lost. I say that's the largest window of opportunity lost in a generation in Brazil. Now it's time for us to take measures to improve the business environment so we can attract more investments to Brazil. So we adopted a series of improvements in the energy policy. Petrobras is no longer the sole operator in the pre-salt province. We now have a bidding rounds calendar that goes from 2017 to 2019. Bidding rounds for concession contracts and for production sharing contracts in the pre-salt region. And by the end of the year, we will announce the 5 years calendar. So in anticipation, we will inform which are the areas that we will be offering in each one of these bidding rounds until 2021. So we'll give time and opportunity for the companies to understand and to study the acreage under offer. We have new exploration and production policies. These policies, they demand that we know our potential and that we maximize our recovery factor. We have simplified and reduced the local content requirements in the bidding rounds. It is no longer a bidding criteria, and the requirements are much lower and much simpler. The government has adopted a series of programs to reactivate the onshore operations, to develop the natural gas market, to incentivize the usage of biofuels, and to stimulate the production of fuels in Brazil. And the last measure that was taken a few weeks ago was the extension of the Repetro. Repetro is a kind of tax incentive necessary to import equipment utilized by the industry in the exploration and production phase of the contract. But all these measures, the measures related to the new contracts, the bidding rounds, we expect them to bring results in terms of investments and production in the mid to long run, from 2020 onwards. as you have seen, activity in the oil and gas industry in Brazil is depressed. So we need to take measures to unlock investments in term. And those measures, they are much more related to the ongoing contracts, the existing contracts. So they are more associated with the regulation than with policies. And so the main measures that we are taking to unlock investments in the short term are local content waiver regulation, royalty reduction for incremental production, extension of the exploratory phase of the contract signed as a result of the 11 and 12 bidding rounds, to accelerate the issues of the environmental license. I have the headsets here, give me a second. Oh, the other measure I was mentioning to unlock investments in the short term is the transfer of rights negotiation. You know that there is a contract between Petrobras and the government utilizing the capitalization of Petrobras in 2010 that allows Petrobras to develop 5 billion barrels of oil. There is extra barrels. There are extra barrels in the reservoirs. So in order to unlock those barrels, negotiation with Petrobras must be concluded. We expect to have it concluded by the end of this year. So it's possible to have an additional auction in the first semester of 2018. And we have our regulatory agenda that addresses a series of regulatory issues that is available for anyone interested to check in our website. Other measure that we are talking, as I mentioned, is the local content issue. I have here with me a report that I'd like to mention that Wood Mackenzie issued, saying that if we manage to advance in the regulation of the waiver of the local content issue, we can unlock the development of 20 billion barrels of oil reserves in Brazil in the next 10 years. And we estimate from our side in ANP that we'll have 39 new platforms producing oil in Brazil until 2027. 39 platforms will be contracted in this next 10 years period. It's very important for us to expedite the projects because for every platform, 150,000 barrels a day platform, that we delay for a 1 year period, the Brazilian society loss is about 2.6 billion reais. The number is wrong in the chart here. 2.6 billion reais revenues for every 150,000 barrels platforms. It's better the noise now?
Yes. Yes, it's very good. Thank you very much.
All of a sudden, it became clear for me. I don't know if it's the same for you.
It absolutely was, yes.
Yeah, I don't know why, because I didn't do anything. So just, the noise for me just disappeared. Act of God.
Force majeure. Oh.
I hope that acts of God help me next week as well.
Thank you for your effort. Yes.
We are working as well in the incentives to our mature fields. Campos Basin, which was the main producing basin in Brazil, reached 40 years of production. Some of the fields now they are maturing. There is a decline in production. And our recovery factor in Brazil is very low, around 21%. Average in Brazil, 24% in the Campos Basin. Again, 70% for oil and gas in Norway, 35% oil recovery average in the world. So we are working in measures to reduce the royalties in the incremental production for new in these old and mature fields. For every 1% that we increase oil recovery in Brazil, we add 2.2 billion barrels of reserves. In the mid and long term, the measures that we are taking, as I mentioned, is environmental licensing, improved regulation, the bidding rounds, and as of next year, we will have open acreage in Brazil. All blocks that have been offered by ANP in the past or have been relinquished, they can be put for evaluation by the industry in an open acreage model. Our intention is to do that by waves starting beginning of 2018. So it's very, very important, this type of measure, to help identify small and mid-sized exploration and production companies. So this is the model of the open acreage, because we want to really revitalize and stimulate the onshore activities. It completes the cycle in the Brazilian oil and gas industry, which was always dependent on Petrobras, and our intention is to develop dozens of small and mid-sized companies able to assume and to produce oil in mature fields, not only in the onshore basins in the northeast of the country, but especially in the Campos Basin. As a result of these efforts, we estimate that we will have, under the ongoing contracts, 22 new platforms being built in the next 10 years, around 600 billion reais investments. And then as a result of the bidding rounds, using the numbers that we administrate, we estimate that we will have the need for 17 new platforms, in a total of 39 new platforms in Brazil up to 2027, and 850 billion reais in investments. Those investments, 850 billion reais, from those investments, about 350 billion reais will be contracted in Brazil with Brazilian companies. So that's the expectation that we have as a result of all these measures that we are taking in Brazil in order to bring investments in the long run, but also to stimulate the activity in the very short run. A very quick view on the bidding rounds. We'll have next week on the 27th, the 14 bidding rounds for concessions, 287 blocks. We estimate in those blocks 50 billion barrels of oil in place. And then we'll have in 2018 and 2019 the 15 and the 16 bidding rounds, and then the same in 2020, 2021. In the pre-salt polygon, in the production sharing contracts, we will offer in the next years 18 areas in the pre-salt polygon. So we have already executed most of the documents for these 3 next bidding rounds, the ones in October and the one next week. We have reduced entry costs. The contracts are much simpler. We are incentivizing investment funds to fund the industry, and we have also in these contracts royalties adjustment for the mature and for the frontier basins. In the pipeline for the bidding rounds, we have the definition of the blocks and the documentation that we want to have ready until the end of this year. The same for the next pre-salt bidding rounds. And by the end of it, the sectors that will be in offer in the bidding rounds between 2020 and 2021. And during 2018, we will start discussing the sectors to be offered in 2022. The idea is always having a 5 years bidding round calendar from now onwards. all those bidding rounds, they should attract $80 billion in direct investments in Brazil and bring 2 million barrels of new oil production by 2027. Few slides on the natural gas and downstream business in Brazil. We need to modernize and to increase our infrastructure in the natural gas business. We see significant opportunities in Brazil now because for the first time ever we see an opening in the natural gas market in Brazil. So there are a number of opportunities in the natural gas arena, LNG pipelines, terminals, processing units, production, LNG. So it's an open field, the natural gas market in Brazil, after Petrobras has decided to reposition and to put assets for sale. We see in the next years, largest window of opportunity. Contracts with the distribution companies are expiring. The Bolivia-Brazil pipeline contracts is expiring. We have seen a contraction in the market in the last few years because of the recession, but we estimate that consumption is going to grow in the next few years. We are using more natural gas in the thermal power plants for power generation. So I repeat, it's a window of opportunity that I haven't seen in a professional life for companies interested in investing in natural gas business in Brazil. In the downstream, the picture is similar. We have a lack of infrastructure. Petrobras is opening up refining sector for partnerships. We need terminals, we need pipelines. We will need more production of fuels in Brazil, biofuels and oil derivatives. Brazil is a relevant importer already. It will become a more relevant importer in the future. We will be dependent on imports of gasoline, diesel, and other derivatives. So we see space for new refining projects in Brazil because the logistics costs of exporting oil and the imports of gasoline and diesel, they add a significant margin for refinery projects in Brazil, even if we understand that there is idle capacity in the refining market in the world, but we see opportunities for increasing the refining capacity in Brazil and for biofuels production in Brazil in the years to come. When we put together the increase in the imports and also the Brazilian commitments with the Paris Agreement that demands production of much stronger volume of ethanol in Brazil, we encourage companies to study business opportunities of producing biofuels and oil products in Brazil in the years to come. So a unique and new opportunity. I'm coming to an end. I just want to make some final remarks. And the final remarks are that since Petrobras was founded in the 50s, this is the first time that we have Petrobras repositioning in the upstream, downstream, and natural gas business simultaneously with the government policies that open the natural gas refining and upstream business in Brazil. So it's the biggest transformation ever in the sector, which also bring opportunities for the service and supply chain sector, because we need new and integrated companies operating in the supply chain for this new and competitive oil and gas industry that we'll have in the years to come. That's what I had for you this afternoon. I thank you very much for your attention. I apologize for the noise and for the delay, and now I'm ready for some questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Decio. Appreciate that. Definitely appreciate you working through the presentation there. Just a reminder, folks, if you would like to ask a question, we'll use the the chat function. So on your where we've been chatting about some of the conversation so far, just pose your question right there, and we will get to it. So, Decio, let me start. Well, I was talking pretty poorly, but there's a question here, and there's a couple different things. So you went quickly through some of the issues, and I think one thing that pops up whenever we talk now about Brazil, and we talk about the upstream and upcoming auction, people are all very curious to understand what has changed in terms of local content requirements when you go to auction now in Brazil. So I think, this is a recurring theme. It's something that we've heard a lot in the industry and around the region about over the last several years. But help us understand exactly, you talked about a local content waiver regulation. If you could just summarize and make clear what exactly has changed and why it's important.
Well, local content regulations in Brazil, they were complex and very difficult to comply and very difficult to assess. We had every year, every bidding round, a different policy, normally more complex, that we had to follow the local content issues regarding those 70, 80 items, specific items, with very high percentage of local content. For this next bidding rounds in 2017, the government simplified the policy. Now we have 3 different types of local content policies in the development phase, 18% for the offshore operations in the exploratory phase. On the development phase, we have 25% for well construction, drilling and completion, 40% for the lines and for the Christmas trees, and 25% for the production unit. Local content no longer is a bid criteria, is a commitment in the contracts. So now it's much simpler and much easier to evaluate compliance. But in the past, since 2005, the regulation was very complex, and there was a provision for a waiver in the local content requirements. But the agency, ANP, had never regulated the regulation. So it was open, the interpretation and how to apply and how to allow those waivers. So what we did in the past few months is that we are discussing a new regulation that treats the waiver issue from 2005 until 2016 onwards. So our proposition, which is under consultation, in fact, a public consultation concluded this week. We will have a public hearing October the 3rd to discuss the subject, and then we will decide on the final regulation. But our idea is to keep the original contracts as they are, but to open the possibility that the companies and the agency, in case of the concession contracts, and the companies and the government, in the case of production sharing contracts, they can sign addendum of the contract, adopting voluntarily the new policies that I just explained, which are valid for this year's bidding rounds. I don't know if I made myself clear, but that is the regulation under discussion.
No, thank you. And I think there was one thing I want to make sure that I understood this and everyone heard it correctly. So one of the major changes has been that local content is no longer part of the bidding criteria, but rather part of the contractual commitment. Is that correct?
Correct.
So that's a major change.
Yes. And it has been already implemented.
Correct. Excellent. All right. So
And now,
go ahead, please.
no, and now there will be a 120 days period after the regulation is published for the companies to decide if they want to make the change or not. If we publish the regulation as it is, we will know after the public hearing. We make a decision based on the feedback that we have from the market.
That's October 3rd.
Yes, October the 3rd. And it will take 1 month for the people here to recover and study, analyze all the suggestions that we will receive.
Excellent. All right. I want to for the discussion of certainly local content is something we've looked at a lot, and much discussion. Let's talk a little bit about the gas. There's several questions.
And select the one you want me to answer.
Yeah, no, exactly. I would like to focus a little bit more on the gas now, and there's a couple of different questions. But let's start before you get to the specific questions. I wanted you to. I don't think I heard you talk about the gas para crecer concept. So could you give a little bit of background for the context on natural gas? There's a major discussion with several working groups in the government, across industry in Brazil. There's a concept called gas para crecer. What exactly is happening in terms of natural gas in broad contextual terms?
Well, since Petrobras was founded, Petrobras had a monopoly from 1953 up to 1997. With the new oil bill in 2097, we had an open market in the natural gas business, but in practice, Petrobras continued to be a monopoly. Petrobras controlled most of the production. They own the pipelines. They own the LNG terminals. They own the processing plants. They had the contracts with Bolivia and with the distribution companies. They had a monopoly in the LNG imports. So, in practice, Petrobras controlled the natural gas in Brazil, and also the assets, the midstream assets. Now, Petrobras decided to reposition themselves in the natural gas business. They said that they no longer will be building infrastructure, and more important, they are selling midstream. They already sold the pipeline network in Southeast Brazil, a $5.2 billion deal. They have now announced that they will sell the larger portion of the pipeline system, which is the Northeast grid. They say that they will no longer be the sole importer of Bolivian gas. They made an agreement with Total to share the Bahia LNG terminal. They tried to sell the Bahia de Guanabara, Rio de Janeiro LNG terminal as well. So when we add that, all these Petrobras movements with the contractual time frame that we have in Brazil, meaning that some of the most important LCD contracts with Petrobras expires in 2019, the same year that Bolivia-Brazil pipeline contract expires. And then we see that you have abundant volumes of LNG in the Atlantic Basin, and we have increasing production of gas offshore Brazil. When we put all this together, we realize that is a transformation happening in the natural gas business in Brazil at the present time.
So let me thank you, and let me ask. You mentioned offshore, and there's a specific question What is Brazil doing to solve the huge amounts of pre-salt gas that are currently being re-injected?
Well, now the companies are mainly injecting the gas in the reservoirs, and some gas will be coming onshore using the current pipelines that we have in place in the Campos and Santos Basin. But our estimate is that we will need additional pipelines in the future, in the next 10 years, to bring onshore the increasing offshore production.
So would you say the growth in gas production in Brazil is going to occur in the offshore?
In the very short term, yes, but we also believe that there is an enormous potential for onshore production in several basins. And in this next bidding round, we are offering blocks in two of them, the basins that we believe that they are more gas prone. Parnaíba Basin in the northeast and Paraná Basin in the southeast, and we hope also to have production in these two basins in the years to come. But I guarantee that production is going to go increasing from offshore because the contracts are already under production. The onshore basins, especially Paraná Basin, is contracts for exploration in the first moments.
So I recently read, I'm curious, we're almost out of time, but one thing jumped to mind here as you were talking, and we're talking about the production of natural gas. I saw something recently quoting the Executive Secretary of Petroleum and Gas from the Ministry of Energy and Mines, indicating that by 2030, there's an expectation that the Brazilian domestic natural gas production will triple by 2030. Does that seem to be something in line with the estimates that you're referring to?
It seems to be something very feasible. Yes.
Okay, so like you said, this is a major transformation then across all segments of the gas sector. Let me pivot then to a question about unconventional resources. And there's a question about what is the status on unconventional resource development in Brazil, shale oil, shale gas. There were some blocks that were tendered a few years ago. What's the latest?
Well, there's some legal restrictions to perform frac jobs in some Brazilian states. And that's something that we want to deal with in the months to come. The idea is to have a seminar here in Brazil and start a discussion on how to tap this question of the unconventionals in the country. I say that's something that is in the agenda already.
But the unconventional blocks, they're in the bidding schedule over the next several years. The the 7 or 8, 9 bids at auctions that are going to be developed beyond this fall, beyond the next couple months. Are unconventional blocks going to be included, or is that to be determined?
No, they are not included in the bidding rounds programmed. We plan to start a discussion, and after the discussion, we will decide how to proceed with the unconventional.
I see. Excellent. Well, Décio, we're running out of time, and I want to let you go. I know there's things. I want to ask you a very unfair question to wrap up this conversation. A week from, just under a week from now, you will be hosting the 14th bidding round. 287 blocks will be offered. So my very unfair question to you is, what is the expectation on the part of the Brazilian government in terms of those 287 blocks? Are you expecting half of them to be successfully tendered? What's your expectation going into next week?
Well, we do not measure success in our bidding rounds by number of blocks or by the amount of signing bonus that we get. In our point of view, the success of the bidding round will be measured by the quality of the companies that we attract to explore and develop reserves in Brazil. We expect that we have a variety of new players operating in Brazil. We expect that the players that are already established in Brazil, they increase their portfolio, exploratory portfolio. And if that happens, we will consider that bidding round is successful, and I'm sure that will be successful. I'm sure that we will attract some of the major players in the oil and gas industry worldwide to be increasing their portfolio in Brazil next week.
Spoken like a diplomat. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much, Decio. From everyone online, thank you. We appreciate your participation. Obviously, best wishes. We hope that the auction is a success by whatever metric you choose to measure, and we will be watching from here. Actually, we will be in Panama City because on the following day, on September 28th, we'll have our Institute of the Americas Roundtable on energy in Panama. But the day before, we'll certainly be watching as the news from Rio de Janeiro hits the world market. Best wishes to everyone. I know AMP and you have been working very hard to attract a significant amount of interest. Every time I seem to trade messages with you, Decio, you're in some different time zone and usually not in Rio. So you're working hard to attract investment. Congratulations in advance. Thank you very much. And for those of you who have not, please make plans to join us in Panama. Thanks again, Decio Done, and everyone for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. You said I'm diplomatic, but I'll be bold as well. So if you are interested, I challenge you to challenge me after October 27, so we can make a balance of the results of these next 3 bidding rounds.
That sounds like a plan. We will. I will challenge you, and we'll get in touch after the pre-salt auction at the end of October.
All right.
And by the way,
Decio,
thank you so much.
Boa noite.